you think of Native American homes, one image probably rises first. A single tipi, rising like a spear against the horizon, smoke curling from its crown, framed by endless plains. It's elegant, iconic, and simple. But simplicity can be deceptive. Imagine standing there in the dead of winter, minus 20 degrees, wind slicing across the prairie, snow piling knee-deep. The teepee looks too fragile to survive a storm like that. And yet, for centuries, families lived inside them, slept in warmth, cooked meals, and woke up to see the dawn glowing through the smoke hole. How? Here's the catch. The teepee wasn't just a tent. It was a microclimate, a piece of climate engineering disguised as simplicity. Long before the word architecture even existed in English, the people of the plains had already solved problems modern designers still struggle with: insulation, ventilation, and mobility, using nothing but wood, hide, and an understanding of wind. But survival on this continent wasn't one story, one shape, or one invention. Picture the Great Plains swept by icy winds. Now picture the frozen tundra of the north, where snow can bury the ground in silence. Move south into deserts, where heat burns the air until it shimmers. Cross eastward into forests soaked in rain, rivers twisting through dense green. Every landscape was a new challenge, and native builders met each one with ingenuity that feels, even now, ahead of its time. Still, the irony remains. Most of us only remember the teepee, a design so perfect for one lifestyle that it eclipsed hundreds of others. We forgot about the earth lodges, half-buried domes of soil that stayed warm when blizzards raged outside. We forgot about the adobe pueblos that cooled themselves under the punishing desert sun. We forgot the wigwams, woven domes that breathed with the forest, and the stilt houses that hovered above wetlands where insects ruled. The pain here isn't nostalgia, it's misunderstanding. For generations, the story of Native American architecture was reduced to a single silhouette. But when you look closer, that image unravels into a vast network of knowledge. These weren't primitive shelters. They were ecological machines, crafted by observation, refined through generations, and built in harmony with the land. Here's the weird part. In the modern world, with steel, glass, and climate control, we still struggle to build homes that truly fit their environment. We overheat, we overcool, we burn fuel to fight nature. But indigenous architects didn't fight it. They listened to it. The wind became a compass, the sun a tool, the earth itself a source of balance. So, as we stand here, centuries later, facing storms of our own, melting ice, rising heat, shifting seasons, maybe the real question isn't how they survived. It's what they knew that we've forgotten. The teepee may be the symbol, but behind it lies a universe of design genius, a legacy of survival, not by dominance, but by understanding. And that's where our journey begins. Beyond the teepee, into the wilderness of ideas that once shaped a continent and might just help us build a future that finally makes sense with nature, not against it. They say the teepee could breathe. At first, that sounds poetic, until you realize it's literal. Inside that conical frame, every draft of wind, every wisp of smoke, every flicker of fire was part of a living system. The structure wasn't random. It was aerodynamic, thermodynamic, and astonishingly efficient. Here's the catch. Long before engineers built wind tunnels, the Plains tribes already understood how air moves. The shape of the teepee, a cone narrowing toward the sky, wasn't just elegant, it was strategic. Its slanted sides sliced through crosswinds that would flatten a box-shaped cabin. The hide covering could be tightened or loosened depending on weather, expanding in rain, contracting in heat, like skin that breathes. At the top, two flaps, smoke flaps, acted like lungs, pulling air through the fire and carrying smoke away, but never too fast. Adjusted correctly, they created convection, circulating warmth evenly through the space. Even the entrance faced east or southeast, away from the prevailing winds, letting morning light pour in first thing each day. Weird part? Step inside one during a blizzard, and the temperature difference could shock you. Snow melting on the hide outside, while warmth radiated from the central fire. Families slept in a ring around it, layered in furs. The floor insulated by dry grass, bark, and animal hides that trapped air like modern thermal foam. The teepee, in effect, was a miniature weather system, one that balanced heat, airflow, and moisture almost perfectly. But the insight goes far beyond a single design. Across the continent, indigenous architects mastered natural law with a level of precision that modern science is only now beginning to quantify. They knew how to use mass, air, and orientation, three elements that define passive architecture today. In the frozen north, earth lodges were half-buried domes insulated by layers of sod and soil, their entrances angled downward to trap heat. In the desert, pueblos used thick earthen walls as thermal batteries, storing daytime warmth to release at night. In the forests, wigwams and longhouses created natural ventilation through curvature and layering, letting smoke rise without losing comfort. Every home was an equation. Material plus form plus climate equals survival. They didn't need thermostats or blueprints. They had intuition refined by centuries of trial and memory. Each family, each community, observed the landscape like scientists. How snow drifted against a slope, how shade shifted through the day, how wind whispered through branches. That knowledge became structure. And here's the aha moment. The brilliance of Native American architecture wasn't that it resisted nature, it cooperated with it. The teepee didn't block the wind, it danced with it. The pueblo didn't fight the sun, it harnessed it. The earth lodge didn't escape the cold, it used the earth's own warmth to survive it. That mindset, harmony over control, is what made these shelters timeless. So when we talk about sustainable design today, about green buildings and eco-homes, maybe we're not inventing anything new. Maybe we're remembering something ancient. Indigenous architects already understood that comfort and survival aren't opposites. They're partners. And their secret wasn't technology. It was awareness. Because in their world, every wall, every roof, every doorway followed the same law. Nature always leads, and the wise builder listens. And that's the real genius we're about to uncover. The tools, the materials, the living technology that made these homes more than shelters. They were masterpieces of science hidden in plain sight. Let's dive deeper into the tools, the materials, the hidden science behind survival. The genius of Native American shelters wasn't in grandeur or ornament. It was in how every part, from the flap of a hide to the curve of a pole, worked like a mechanism. The teepee, for instance, wasn't just a cone of hide and sticks. It was an ecosystem of layers, each with a specific job. The outer hide kept out rain and wind, while the inner liner, a second skin, controlled air circulation. Warm air from the fire rose between the two layers, drawing in fresh air from below and venting smoke through the flaps above. The result? Constant airflow, no suffocation, and a steady, dry warmth. Here's the smart move. They even engineered the floor. Instead of sleeping directly on frozen earth, families spread a thick layer of dry grass topped with furs. That created natural insulation, trapping air pockets that kept the floor several degrees warmer. Stones heated in the fire were placed near sleeping areas, radiating warmth through the night. In modern terms, they built radiant floor heating, using nothing but instinct and observation. But the ingenuity didn't stop at architecture. Inside, survival was an art of chemistry and biology. When harsh winters froze rivers and buried forests in snow, families relied on preserved food that didn't just last, it nourished. Take pemmican, a blend of dried meat, rendered fat, and wild berries. High in calories, rich in vitamin C, and perfectly shelf-stable, it could sustain travelers for months. Or pawpaw cake, made from wild fruit high in nutrients. Or mayhaw jelly, persimmon pudding, cloudberry preserves. Each one a small miracle of foraging knowledge and preservation. Together, they formed a complete diet that modern nutritionists would call balanced and functional. Here's the thing. Every tool, every practice was born from necessity and perfected by patience. The smoke flaps atop the tipi could be rotated like sails to face or deflect wind. In storms, the lower edge of the hide could be pegged tight to the ground or lifted in summer to create a breeze. The hide itself was stitched with precision, hides overlapping downward like shingles to shed water. Even the poles, long, flexible lodgepole pines, were chosen for their natural taper and resilience. Each pole leaned at a specific angle, creating structural tension that made the tipi stable against gusts that could level a wooden cabin. And then there were the hearths, small, contained fires whose position was everything. Too close to the center, and smoke filled the space. Too far, and heat escaped. Generations learned the balance by heart, refining it until it became instinct. The tipi became not just a home, but a living classroom. Every adjustment teaching the next generation how to live with the elements instead of against them. Meanwhile, in other regions, tools adapted to their own climates. In the north, snow houses, igloos, were feats of geometry. Each block of snow angled slightly inward, creating a self-supporting dome that redistributed heat. Builders even carved small air vents to prevent carbon buildup. In the deserts, adobe bricks acted as thermal batteries. Thick walls of sand, straw, and clay absorbed sunlight by day, releasing it slowly through the night, maintaining comfort without a single piece of metal or wire. In the wetlands, homes stood on stilts made from cypress, a wood that resisted rot even in constant damp. What's fascinating is that none of these tools were standardized, because they didn't need to be. They evolved with each tribe's environment, each family's rhythm. One design couldn't fit all, because one landscape couldn't define a continent. Yet beneath the variety, one principle stayed constant. Use what's local, waste nothing, and make nature your ally. If you think about it, that's the original sustainable design toolkit. Centuries before the term existed. Adjustable vents, double wall insulation, passive heating, local sourcing, concepts modern engineers now patent and market. We're already alive in the wilderness, crafted by hand, refined by necessity, and passed down through story. So next time you see a tipi silhouetted against the plains, look closer. It's not primitive, it's precision. Every flap, every seam, every pole is a tool, tuned to the rhythm of the world around it. And every other indigenous home, From the Earth Lodge to the Adobe Pueblo holds the same quiet intelligence. Because for native builders, the question was never, how do we conquer the elements? It was, what can the wind teach us? And that is where engineering meets philosophy. Imagine the moment before dawn on the Great Plains. The world is silent except for the low hiss of wind sliding over grass. Inside a teepee, embers still glow from the night fire. Someone stirs, adds kindling, and warmth ripples outward like light through water. Within minutes, the space breathes again, the air rising, circulating, balancing. What looks effortless is in fact a series of practiced actions, repeated for generations. Here's how it all worked. Building a teepee wasn't guesswork. A skilled family could raise one in less than an hour. First, 3 poles, the tripod, were bound together and lifted upright, the frame that would carry the rest. Then, each pole was added in a careful spiral, leaning against the central structure, creating symmetry strong enough to withstand gusts that could tear roofs from cabins. Finally, the hide covering, sewn from tanned buffalo or elk, was wrapped around, pegged tight at the base, and pulled upward in a smooth arc. The smoke flaps were adjusted, the liner hung, the entrance faced east. Within an hour, the home was ready to live in. When it was time to move, the whole structure could be packed, tied to horses, and carried to the next camp. A portable home that could travel hundreds of miles in a season. Smart move. The same poles that formed the teepee's bones doubled as travois, sled-like carriers that held supplies on the journey. Nothing was wasted. Inside, daily life followed a quiet choreography. The central fire pit marked both heart and compass. Around it, sleeping platforms lined the perimeter, arranged so that every person shared the warmth equally. Furs and hides softened the ground, while bags of dried food, tools, and trade goods hung neatly from the poles above, safe from damp and insects. In cold weather, the bare skirt, the lower edge of the cover, was dropped to seal warmth in. In summer, it was lifted to let the breeze flow through. Smoke flaps pivoted with the wind, adjusted by wooden poles from the ground. In a single day, a family might tweak the structure half a dozen times to match the shifting air. That same adaptability appeared in every landscape. In the frozen north, families dug pit houses, half buried in the ground for insulation, lined with bark and moss. In the desert, adobe walls soaked up heat by day and released it slowly by night. In forests, wigwams were rebuilt seasonally, the bark renewed each spring. In wetlands, stilt houses stood high above floodwaters, their open walls catching breezes that kept mosquitoes at bay. Each practice came from an unspoken rule: build with the rhythm of nature, not against it. Foraging and food gathering followed the same principle. Families moved with the seasons, hunting bison in summer, harvesting berries in fall, fishing when rivers thawed, collecting herbs and roots as they bloomed. Foraging wasn't random, it was stewardship. Pawpaw fruit was gathered ripe and dried for winter sweets. Mayhaws were simmered into syrup. Persimmons and cloudberries became puddings and preserves. Each harvest was careful, never taking more than the land could spare. That's how abundance lasted, through discipline, not dominance. Here's the interesting part. These weren't isolated actions. They were systems. Human behavior synchronized with ecology. Smoke flaps, storage pits, drying racks, seasonal migrations, all connected in a network of balance. Even the act of cooking carried science. Fires were positioned to vent properly, stones heated, and rotated to maintain steady temperature. Tools carved from bone to stir or scrape without contaminating food. In the modern sense, this was a kind of adaptive architecture, not just buildings that changed with the weather, but lives that changed with the land. Indigenous families didn't occupy space, they participated in it. The tipi, the earth lodge, the adobe, each one was a living organism, maintained daily through awareness. And perhaps the most overlooked truth, none of it was improvised. Every motion, raising poles, tightening hides, collecting reeds, was guided by precise knowledge. Children learned to read wind direction before they could read symbols. They could tell when smoke would cling or when rain would pass by scent alone. Knowledge wasn't written, it was lived. So while today's world relies on blueprints and sensors, indigenous builders relied on something rarer: attention. They watched, learned, adapted, and moved in harmony with their surroundings. And through that quiet precision, they built systems that worked perfectly. Homes that could rise, fall, and rise again with the rhythm of the earth. Because in the wilderness, survival wasn't just about endurance. It was about fluency, knowing the language of the land and speaking it through wood, hide, and fire. And that fluency made them not just survivors, but engineers of the natural world. Step back for a moment and look at what these designs achieved. They didn't just work, they excelled. The tipi, often dismissed as primitive, used only a fraction of the resources needed to build a log cabin. Records suggest it required less than 1/10 the amount of wood, yet performed far better in cold, wind, and rain. Inside, warmth was distributed evenly, the air stayed clean, and moisture never trapped. It was the original low-carbon home, centuries before the phrase existed. Here's the twist. Modern tests on reconstructed tipis show how efficient they really were. With just a small central fire, interior temperatures could remain above freezing, even when outside dropped below -20. The air circulation, guided by the smoke flaps and double liner, kept oxygen levels balanced and prevented condensation. That means fewer respiratory problems, less damp, and a healthier living space. Results even modern eco-houses struggle to match. But the real benefit went beyond comfort. Every indigenous shelter demonstrated a perfect balance between human need and environmental impact. The materials came entirely from local sources. No mining, no deforestation beyond necessity. When a camp moved, the site returned to nature within weeks. No plastic, no metal, no scars on the land. The buffalo hides that once covered the tipi decomposed back into soil, feeding the same grasslands that fed the herds. It was a closed loop. Nature borrowed, nature repaid. Food systems mirrored that same efficiency. Pemmican, that dense survival food, packed more calories per pound than almost any ration of its time. It kept travelers alive for months. Its fat-to-protein ratio tailored perfectly for cold climates. And because it used berries like chokecherry or currant, it supplied vitamin C that prevented scurvy, a disease that decimated European explorers who didn't understand the land's natural pharmacy. The same was true for pawpaw and persimmon, both high in antioxidants and minerals. Even desserts, mayhaw jelly, cloudberry preserves, weren't indulgence. They were nutrition disguised as comfort. Think about that. Centuries before refrigeration, before modern nutrition science, native families were already designing diets that met all essential needs with what the land offered. It wasn't luck. It was data, gathered through observation, pattern, and respect.
Look closely.
Every taste, every season carried memory. Here's the smart move. By living this way, native communities achieved something our advanced world is still chasing: resilience. Their shelters could stand through storms, be rebuilt quickly, and adapt instantly to climate. Their food could travel, preserve energy, and keep people healthy without waste. Their social systems, shared fires, communal lodges, strengthened bonds instead of isolating individuals. And through all of it, their carbon footprint was nearly invisible. Modern studies call this sustainable living, but for them, it was just living. There were no buzzwords, no environmental manifestos, just practical knowledge refined by necessity. The Tipi used less wood. The Earth Lodge used the ground's natural heat. The Pueblo harnessed sunlight. And together, they built a world that thrived within its limits, not beyond them. And here's the deeper layer. These homes didn't just protect people from nature, they connected them to it. Sitting around a central fire wasn't only about warmth, it was about story. Each night, families gathered in that shared circle to teach, remember, and dream. The fire became a teacher, the wind a companion. It was survival, yes, but also belonging. In the end, the benefits weren't only physical. They were cultural, emotional, ecological. Indigenous architecture created spaces that fostered balance between humans and elements, between self and community, between need and gratitude. The teepee wasn't just a structure, it was a philosophy built from poles and hide. And maybe that's why, even now, these designs still feel alive. They weren't frozen in time, they were timeless. Because true innovation doesn't age, it adapts. And that brings us to the heart of it all. Not just what Native American builders created, but what their creations meant. The lesson isn't about wood or stone or fire. It's about wisdom, the kind that endures because it listens, learns, and gives back. And that's the legacy still glowing beneath the ashes of every ancient fire. A blueprint, not just for survival, but for harmony. When you trace your hand across the polished pole of a teepee or the sun-baked wall of an adobe home, you touch more than craftsmanship. You touch memory. These weren't just places to live. They were living expressions of a worldview, one that saw nature not as a challenge to conquer, but as a relative to cooperate with. The wind, the earth, the sun, each was a teacher, and the builders were its students. That's the deeper message buried in every structure. The teepee wasn't simply efficient, it embodied a relationship. Its smoke flaps opened toward the sky, as if in conversation with the wind. The Earth Lodge rose from the ground, as though it had grown there, not been built. The pueblo mirrored the cliffs that sheltered it, turning sunlight into rhythm. The wigwam curved like the forest it belonged to. Each design was less an act of construction than one of translation, translating the language of the land into shelter, safety, and belonging. Here's the part that hits hardest. All of this existed long before we invented words like eco-design or sustainability. These were not trends. They were truths, lived out daily through awareness, patience, and restraint. Every home was a dialogue with the land. What do you need from me? And what can I take from you without harm? It was a contract, honored across generations, enforced not by law, but by gratitude. Today, as our cities expand and climates shift, that ancient knowledge feels urgent again. We chase technology to fix the very problems our disconnection created. We talk about carbon, energy, climate control, yet forget the simplest wisdom of all: Live with the land, not above it. The Native American shelters remind us that survival isn't about domination or comfort. It's about relationship, about listening to the environment as though your life depends on it, because it does. The modern world measures progress in glass and steel, but true progress might be quieter. A circle of warmth beneath a hide roof, smoke drifting through a perfectly placed vent, a wall of clay that cools without electricity, a community gathering in the glow of firelight. These aren't relics, they're reminders. And perhaps that's the real inheritance of Indigenous architecture. Not the structures themselves, but the way of seeing. A mindset that says design should serve both people and planet. That beauty lies in balance. That every resource carries a story, and every act of building leaves a moral footprint as much as a physical one. Here's the final thought. The tipi may stand as the symbol, but it's only the doorway. Beyond it lies a vast legacy of brilliance. Earth lodges that outsmarted the cold, pueblos that mastered heat, wigwams that danced with rain, and stilt houses that floated above floods. Together, they form a continent's worth of wisdom, whispering one timeless message. You don't need to fight the wilderness to live within it. So as we look toward the future, in our cities, our homes, our fragile climate, maybe it's time to look backward too. To remember the architects who built with patience instead of pride, who measured success not in height or wealth, but in harmony. Because their shelters didn't just endure the elements, they understood them. And that's the kind of understanding we need again. Beyond the tipi lies a lesson for the modern world. Survival, comfort, and beauty can exist together if we listen. If we build as they built, with respect, with intelligence, and with gratitude. Because the greatest design ever made isn't concrete or glass. It's the balance between human hands and the living earth. Preserve native knowledge. Live with nature, not against it. That's not just history. It's the blueprint for our shared future.